Hey there, this is Randy from Rocks and Roots Runner. For about a year and a half now, I've been making leather patches, leather patch hats, and selling them on my Etsy shop, Rocks and Roots Runner. What kind of started off as messing around with a 3D printer turned into a nice little side hustle, but really just was more of an outlet to be creative. Now I want to provide the opportunity to others to make available some of my more popular stamps and instructions on how to make leather patches. First off, I'm an engineer. I am not a professional leather worker. This is just a very simple process that I've used to make hundreds of patches, and many of them are custom. I'm sure there's people that are going to say that there's other techniques that they use or more expensive equipment. This is just a real simple process that you as a beginner can take, open up your own Etsy shop, maybe make a little bit of extra money by making leather patches. First off, let's take a look at some of the materials I use during this embossing process. The most important is the leather, obviously. What I like to use is a 4 to 5 ounce vegetable tan leather, readily available at Michael's in about 8.5 by 11 sheets. Also purchase this on Amazon. You can get it in various sizes, but I typically pick up the leather scraps about 3 to 4 square foot at a time. Really good stuff. You know, it's formable, it's stampable, and it holds it very well. Some of the dyes I use, there's many out there, but I really like to use the EcoFlow antique gel and some of the EcoFlow products. They are a water-based dye, so it's pretty easy cleanup, but sometimes you do have to watch, because once you do dye the material, the leather, you know, you can take water and some of the color will rub off. So, but it is good. It's obviously eco-friendly. That's why I call it EcoFlow gel antiquing dye. I use the medium brown. That's what I'm going to show you here on some of these patches. It turns out really well, and then you can take a brush and kind of touch up some of the other areas that you might want a little bit darker. And if you want a real permanent solution, the best stuff that I find is Fiving's Pro Dye. I use this in black and red and walnut, saddle tan, and light tan. I use it on a bunch of different products. This stuff is really good, and then you got to be careful when you put it on too, because it'll dye anything and everything that you touch with it. So what I do with this is I put it on prior to any of the wetting or embossing. I let it completely dry, and then I will go through the same process as I'm about to show you here about how you wet the leather before embossing. But it turns out really well, but it doesn't give you that contrast that some of the antique gel does, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. So the first thing we want to do, well, actually the very most important thing as well, is you make sure you have the materials, some wax paper set down here, and then you're going to have lots of paper towels. I like to use some wool daubers, you know, to apply the Pro Dye to. The paper towels here are to actually wipe off some of the excess dye on the antique gel. I know people use rags or use sponges and so forth, but this is just a cheap roll of paper towels. I kind of double them up, and that's how we get the dye off of there. So the first thing that you want to do in this process, you know, that comes with the kit that you buy on Rocks and Roots Runner, is you'll get some 3 by 3 inch leather patches. And these here, and also like right now, I have the Compass Rose stamp that's available, as well as I believe I might even have the Appalachian Trail patch, or soon we'll have the Appalachian Trail stamp that I create available for purchase. So you get this, and you get 2 pieces of leather. The stamps are 3D printed at a PLA off my printer, and it is designed by myself. So what you want to do first is you take one of your pieces of leather, you just drop it in water. I have a tub of water here, and it's going to sit there and kind of bubble, and you can kind of hear the bubbles, and you can see them around the edges as they're coming up a little bit. It doesn't take long, and usually what will happen is the leather piece will just kind of sink down to the base, and then that's good enough. That means it's thoroughly wetted. This is kind of called casing the leather, if you like. There's different ways to case it. This is a very simple process. So casing leather takes a while, you know, and if you want to get a better stamp, then it does take like overnight for you to get the casing process down. So this one is completely down all the way to the bottom of the container. I just let it drip dry here. What I'll usually do with this then is I take it and I put it on a rack. And depending on what I'm doing, how many am I doing, how fast do I need them, because like right now I can go put it on in a vise or in a press that I've actually made instructions available online. But what I can do now is I can go ahead and emboss it, but if I want a little bit better, or want it to be a little bit more cased, so to speak, is I'll let it dry. And I can let it dry, sometimes I'll let it dry overnight, depending if I put it before I go to bed. I'll wake up in the morning, it's still kind of damp, and that's really what you want for a good embossing. But it does work right now to just go ahead and take it out of the water and immediately put it in a vise to begin the embossing process. I do recommend, though, letting it case a little bit. What you want to do is get the leather to dry out some. Don't want it to be completely dry, but you can feel some moisture in it still. It'll start to turn back to its natural color, and that's about the time that you really want to go stamp it. It doesn't take that much to stamp it at that point. You don't have to leave it in the vise very long. As you can imagine that if it's still wet and you pull it off, it's still going to absorb some moisture into where the embossing is, and might want to swell up a little bit and get back to the original shape. But like I said, just leave it for a couple of hours, or overnight. If you can't get to it right away, I've seen people that they'll take the leather pieces and they can keep it in a plastic bag. So if I cut up a whole bunch of them, say I have 50 patches I want to do, I'll go ahead and wet them all down. I'll put them in a plastic bag, and then as I get to them, they maintain their moisture content, and I'll be able to take them out, kind of let them dry, make sure that they get to that right point where I want to emboss it, and then I'll put them on in the vise or on the press and start embossing my leather pieces. So with this particular one, though, we're going to let it. It's just kind of pretty wet. It's pretty, it's pretty soaking wet. It's thoroughly cased in there. But I'm not going to let it dry anymore because I want to show you this process. This is a very simple one where you just use a bench vise. Okay, I do make available. I have a bigger press that the instructions will be made available soon on what to do there. We're using a bottle jack, and it's a much safer process. It's a lot more consistent, but it's pretty simple. Here I've got a couple pieces of wood that I put the leather down on here. We'll take I'm going to take this one. This is a little bit smaller. It kind of fits the wood better. It's just a design, just a custom design that I made for somebody, and place it down there on the leather. Make sure it's on the wood, just like that. Pretty simple. And then I take this piece of wood and place it over top. And what the wood does then is, as you put it in the clamp, it will take and distribute the load a lot better across the stamp and emboss the leather. So I slip it in there, make sure it's in the middle. And then what I do is with a bench vise, I just tighten up as tight as I can by hand. Just about like that. It's pretty simple. So right now it's doing its work. The leather is being pressed, and it's going to hold that shape in there for a little bit. I usually keep it in there a minimum of 15 minutes. It also depends on how long the leather is cased and what the moisture content in there, because sometimes if it gets dry enough in that condition, I can apply the press, and then just within a couple minutes take it back off, and it holds its embossing. But right now I'm going to leave it on here for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll undo it. So I'm just going to put this over to the side here while that's going, and I'm going to show you how some of the other dyeing techniques. So this is another piece of leather here. I talked about the pro dye. The pro dye, what I like to do with it is very good, and I sell a lot of this on my black flags. If you go on my Etsy shop, you'll see that I have for sale some, they're about 2 by 3.5 inch American flags, and they're all black. I use the black pro dye. It's amazing stuff. But what I want to do here with this particular dye is I want to emboss it after I dye it. So I'm going to take this walnut pro dye, and the nice thing about this one, the pro dye, is that it will, whatever color is on there, I mean, that's the color it's going to be. Some of the EcoFlow products that they provide that are more water-based, you can put the dye on there, and then it will, if you do another coat, it'll get darker and darker and darker. But with this stuff, like I said, it is really good, and you really do want to wear gloves because it'll get everywhere. I don't have any on me right now, but I'm going to hold the corner, and then you just rub it on there. Just make sure you get it, the piece of leather completely covered. It's kind of hard to see here, but I'll bring it up to the camera. See there, it's drying, and then what I'll do there is I'll let that dry for a while, usually overnight, just to make sure that it is completely dry before I start the embossing process. So what we have here, this is drying a little bit. Here's a little bit better picture of it. Again, this is the walnut, I believe. Yes, the walnut pro dye is going to dry a lot darker or a lot lighter than this in the end, but this is really a great dye, a great product, and it's really nice on the black. It shines up really well once you put like a sealer or a glaze on top of the leather. It's really pretty. Okay, we're going to let this sit there and dry a little bit. I'm not going to be doing any embossing on that piece of leather, but if I get it touched anywhere else, it's going to make a mess. So while that's still in the vise there doing this embossing thing, this is a particular custom patch that I did as an example of how it turned out. This is embossed, this is completely dry. This is after I've left it in the vise for about 15 minutes or so, and it doesn't hurt. It can be in there. I've done it and I left it in there overnight. You know, it's really going to emboss well. Very deep. The vegetarian leather is a very good set on it. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to apply the antique gel. And this is probably one of my more popular ways of the processes to dye the patches. You look on my Etsy shop, most of the stuff that I do is more of an antique dye, antique gel, because it's really easy. So what I'll do here is I'll take this patch after it's completely dry. I'll take another wool dauber. Again, this is my EcoFlow antiquing gel. Medium brown is the color that I use. They have various colors. They have a darker brown. I don't know if they have a light brown. I haven't been able to find it, but great products. Get the dauber as wet as you can. And then pretty simple is just, you're going to take it and you're going to rub it around on there. You're going to rub it and get it in the holes and everything. With the new dauber, it kind of wants to soak up some of the dye. So you just want to make it, and just kind of make it a little bit soupy. There's going to be a lot of stuff on there. Just completely go around your embossed pattern. Make sure it's completely covered. And then I take a big towel and I'll double it over, because what I do is you want to wipe off the excess, but I want to make sure I wipe off the excess on the top and not within the embossing. So I kind of fold it over like this, and then I take it and just drag it over the top of it. Okay? And I'll kind of get the clean part again and drag it over the top again. So you just don't want to get into the embossing part of it, but you definitely want to get the excess off the top, and that's what the antiquing does to it. It creates this really nice dark inset of there, and once this dries, it'll be just like that in that color. And then I've got an example here where I went back. Here's some of the number plate ones that I do on number plate hats. And so I come back there, if I wanted a little bit darker on the numbers, I'll take just a simple paintbrush and I'll dip it in the dye and brush it on there, kind of hand do it, just because it makes it stand out a little bit better. But this one did a really good job. You can see the KP, the construction, the detail of it, the detail of the stamp. I mean, that was a fantastic embossing, and the antique gel just really sets it off. One thing I'd like to point out about the patches, and when you order the patches online too, if you could see here especially with the compass rose, there's two outer bands here. There's two outer ridges around the end. Obviously, this outer one kind of creates the trim line that you can trim to. So that way, when the patch gets embossed, you can see this raised area right here. I purposely did that because I was hand cutting these. Now they make all sorts of cutting boards you can get and dies, but I usually, when I do custom stuff, I don't want to wait the month before they come overseas to get this. So what I do is I create just this little line around there in my stamps, and so that way you can take leather scissors and you could just trim right along that line. And so then what it does in this particular example, here's the Pacific Crest Trail patch, and it kind of creates, once you trim it, you can see the natural color of it. And so then what I'll have to do afterwards, I usually take if it's the antique gel, I'll just take the dauber that's kind of wet a little bit and I'll touch it on there and then wipe off some of the excess that gets on the top. Or if it's the pro dye, like this one, here's one of the pro dyes, you can just take it as well and just rub it on the edges of it, and it'll soak in and dry the same color. There's one of the American flags that was in the darker walnut pro dye, which is what I just used here. So that's the way that one turns out. This is more of a saddle tan of the pro dye, so that one has a little bit more contrast on it. with the color. So you can see it doesn't have as much contrast as the antiquing gel, but that's why they call it the antiquing gel. That's the process it takes with the lows and makes them really dark. So we're still waiting for that one to dry, or to clamp a little bit, and then I'll release it and show you what it looks like right out of there. But that's pretty much the process of it. There is one thing after you get done, you let it completely dry and you get it all trimmed up. I usually take these stitching tools and create, if you wanted to or needed to, create the stitching holes in them. You know, they're beveled stitching holes. I think I use a 4mm. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what they are, but yeah, they just put them on there and you just tap them with a hammer along the edge, because you'll notice that the stamps also create this darker edge on the inside. I've left that area for you to put your stitching line in, and so that way if you use a dark thread or something, you can stitch around it that way. That's turned out really easy for me. It's made it really easy for the flags to be able to be sewn on right around that area, having that lower area, and it's easy to put the stitching holes in. Here's an example of the Appalachian Trail patch that I did in antique gel, and you can see here this is for 2021, so people can order these patches that hike the trail this year. And it's also got that darker line around there that is part of the embossing, that you can put the stitching lines on there and sew it onto your garments or your hats or whatever you wanted to. I've had people sew them onto bags. I actually did one on a journal, an Appalachian Trail patch, a smaller one, and put it on a journal for somebody. Very similar to this, and I had a small patch right here, said Appalachian Trail, so they can take it on the trail with them and write notes as they're hiking for the 6 months. Okay, I went ahead and brought the vise back up here. A little shy of 15 minutes, but we'll go ahead and take it out of the vise and see how it looks. Again, after you wet the leather, let it kind of case a little bit, however many hours you want. You know, the longer you do it, the better. But make sure it stays damp. And then I put it in the blocks, tighten it up, hand tight as I can, minimum of 15 minutes. It's okay if you leave it in there an hour, 2 hours, or whatever, but a lot of times if you're making more patches, you want to kind of keep the process going. So that's why it becomes important to maybe let the leather case a little bit more, because it doesn't have to be in the vise as long. Go ahead and undo it. Maybe. So much for hand tight. And that's what you get. Drop off some of the water. That's what happens when you emboss it. Some of the water will leak out of it, you know. But that turned out pretty well for just the short period of time it was in there. I don't know if you can see that design. Very good embossing on there. So what I will let that do is sit. Usually takes overnight to dry. Takes a while. Sometimes I have had help with the lovely heat here in Savannah, Georgia, and been able to put it outside, not in the direct sunlight, but it'll help dry it out a little bit quicker. They will kind of curl up a little bit, but since it's pretty formable, you kind of flatten it back out and it's not a problem. But that's what you do there on this. And this one is ready to dye. Once it's completely dry, you can dye it with the antique gel. You can actually even do it with the pro dye if you want. I've done pro dye over the top of this. You don't get the contrast of the embossing as much as you would if you were to emboss it after you dye the leather. But that is one technique, especially on the black, because the black really doesn't matter. So all the black ones, after I emboss it, I will go ahead and apply the black pro dye on there for the finished product and trim it up. Also, one of the things I wanted to point out is you don't have to use dye. Here's one I did. Here's the Tybee Friday stamp that I created especially for a special gift, and I used an acrylic paints on this one. So it was a blue base, and then I used a cream paint, and I just kind of whisked over the top of it with a paintbrush. This was one I was going to use for a bag, so it's very flexible acrylic leather paint. It's very nice. And then I also did one and put it on a hat, you know, and I used the antique gel dye there and sewed it on a hat. And it turned out really nice, and it's just our own, my wife and I's special Tybee Friday patches that we created. So that's pretty much it, the process to do the embossing of the stamps. I have I do a lot of custom stamps. I have obviously the 3D printer, so we can do a lot of designs if you're interested in. But I'm basically just wanted to make this available to everybody. All right, so this is just a quick process that I do. It's easy. It works for me. I made hundreds of patches. It's been fun. It really is. You just do a lot. You can get very creative. Here's a trail life patch. You know, just a lot of stuff that I've done. The number plate hats, I've probably made a couple hundred of those. Just the number plates to go on the side of the hats. On this corner here, so it's custom. You know, the way I created the stamp was is very easy to do custom numbering on there. So it's really a lot of fun to mess with leather, to be creative with it, to figure out what the dyes work, what don't. And that's kind of the way I started with it, and so I've really enjoyed it. But I want to make it available to others. Maybe they can go out there, they can buy the Compass Rose stamp. It's one of my more popular worldwide stamps. This thing's shipped all over the world, Australia, in Greece, and in Germany and stuff. And so people are actually really like this stamp. So or this patch. But so now I'm making the stamp available. If you go onto rocksandrootsrunner.com, it'll shoot you over to my Etsy shop. You can purchase this stamp. You get the 2 pieces of leather. You have this video available for you, and then I'm going to also be providing instructions on how to make a 16-inch press using a bottle jack. So you can go actually onto Rocks and Roots Runner right now, and you can go to the listing for this Compass Rose, and you can see a picture of the bottle jack press. Very simple, homemade. It's 1 2x4, a couple of 4 angles that are 1 inch by 1 inch angles, and some 3/4 inch plywood, and of course a bottle jack. So it works out really well, and it can. The way I've got it laid out is you can do multiple patches at once. You know, because these are all constant thickness design. So if you order more custom ones, I have a specific process I use with the thickness of it, so they're all the same, so you can do multiple patches at the same time. Keeps the product line going too as well if you're going to make a bunch. I've got one individual that's looking at about 200 patches. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do all those in a quick amount of time, but we'll do the best that we can. So if you have any questions, you know, you can feel free to message me on rocksandrootsrunner.com. They go, like I said, it'll shoot me over to my Etsy shop. Just drop me a line in Etsy if you have questions about that. And I'd love to be able to support the process for you guys. I want everybody to be able to do this. I think it's easy, it's fun, it's a creative side that I think a lot of people just need to, you know, it's a creative outlet, so it's great, and like I said, it's just a lot of fun, and maybe if you can find your own little niche market with some hats or bags or something like that, and be creative in your decorating, you might be able to make a little bit of money at it. So again, rocksandrootsrunner.com, and just look for the Compass Rose leather patch, and I'll make other stamps available as they're made. Thank you.